So many people believe that compromise is what makes relationships work. That if you want a healthy relationship, you have to meet in the middle. But what if I told you that a lot of what people call compromise is actually the surest way to lose yourself in a relationship? And even more than that, it's often the exact reason people start to feel disconnected and build resentment over time. So the question becomes, is compromise actually helping your relationship, or is compromise actually eroding it? For a minute, I want you to consider that not all compromise is actually healthy. There is a version of compromise that creates connection, and there is a version that creates disconnection. But most people don't know the difference because culturally we've been taught that compromise is what keeps relationships alive. Compromise equals maturity. Compromise equals love. Compromise equals being a good partner. But no one really teaches you how to recognize when compromise is actually self-abandonment disguised as love. So for the sake of understanding, let's break compromise into two types. We have false compromise over here and true collaboration over here. So for false compromise, I actually think this is closer to self-abandonment. So this is saying yes when you actually mean no, staying silent to keep the peace, adapting to others in order to avoid conflict. You see, this isn't compromise, it is self-abandonment. So the other type is true collaboration. So this is what I consider aligned adjustment. It's when both people stay connected to themselves and no one is having to sweep their truth under the rug. So solutions actually come from honesty rather than pressure. This is the only form of healthy compromise. It is connection without self-betrayal, where no one has to abandon themselves to stay connected. If you have to abandon aspects of yourself to stay connected to others, that is actually not connection. That is compliance disguised as love. So I want to ask you something. How many times have you said it's fine when it really wasn't? How many times have you agreed to something just to avoid the conflict? Because the answer to those questions are where we need to start. Now, I want you to really sit with this for a minute, because most of us have been in a situation where you just go along with what your partner wants. You tell yourself, it's not really that big of a deal. But later, something feels off. Maybe you feel irritated or distant or maybe even a little resentful, but you can't fully explain why. That's because on the surface, it looks like you're being flexible, but internally, something just got abandoned in you. So now I ask, what do you agree with that you don't fully agree with? Let me give you a real life example. So let's just say that there's a couple. We'll call them Mark and Jenna. Jenna wants to spend more time together on the weekends. Now, Mark, after a long week, he really needs time alone to recharge. Now, instead of being honest, Mark says, yeah, that's fine, we can do whatever you want. Now, on the surface, that looks like compromise. He's trying to make her happy, accommodate her needs. But here's what actually happens. They spend the weekend together, and while Mark is physically there, he is mentally checked out. He's quieter, a little irritable, not fully present, and Jenna now starts to feel like he doesn't even want to be there. And Mark is thinking, I gave you what you wanted, why isn't that enough? Okay, this is where people get confused because technically no one actually did anything wrong, but there's still a break in the connection. because most people don't realize that getting what you asked for does not create connection. If the person giving it had to abandon themselves to do it. I want you to really hear that, because this is where I strongly disagree with a lot of relationship advice. We think if we just compromise, things will get better. False. Healthy relationships do not rely on compromise. They rely on alignment, on truth, on mutual capacity, and healthily meeting each other's needs. Here's the problem. When we get into a pattern of compromise, we start performing and accommodating and not actually connecting. And people can feel that. Even if they don't consciously know it, they feel it. People don't respond to your words, they respond to your congruence. So when you say yes, but your body is actually saying no, that disconnect will show up in your energy. Now, let's go a level deeper. When you consistently abandon yourself, you don't just lose your voice in the relationship. The real consequence is that you start to fragment internally. Part of you is showing up, yes, and part of you is being left behind. And over time, not only does that create emotional distance and resentment, but also it creates confusion about what you actually want. My question to you is, where in your relationships are you showing up but not actually there? And this is why I say you don't lose yourself all at once. You actually lose yourself one, it's fine, at a time. Now let me show you how this plays out differently. Chris and Alyssa. Alyssa voices that she really wants to go to an event this weekend. Chris pauses and says, I want to be honest. I don't really have the capacity for that this week. Now that might feel uncomfortable in the moment, but here's what's different. Chris stayed connected to himself. He didn't override his internal state. And now they have a real choice to make. They're either going to adjust the plan, go separately, or find something that works for both of them. But whatever they choose, the choice is coming from truth, not pressure. And that creates a completely different experience of connection. So here's what I want to offer you. The goal in a relationship is not compromise. The goal is alignment. And alignment doesn't mean you always agree. It means you stay honest about your internal experience. You don't abandon yourself in order to maintain connection to others. You allow differences to exist without forcing resolution. Because the truth that most people avoid is that not everything is meant to be resolved. Some things are meant to reveal incompatibility. And when you try to compromise your way around that, you don't create harmony, you create confusion. Now, I want to be really clear about something. This is not about becoming rigid. This is also not about saying, I'm never going to bend for anyone, because that's just the opposite extreme of what I'm talking about. A lot of the time, what we call compromise is actually a protective strategy to avoid conflict or rejection or to feel secure in a relationship. So if you see yourself in this pattern, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because at some point, that is what helped you stay connected. The question I want you to ask yourself is, what did this pattern protect you from losing? Because when you understand that, you can start to shift it without judging yourself. So the goal isn't asking, how do I compromise better? A more powerful question is, where am I saying yes when I actually mean no? Because the quality of your relationships is directly tied to the quality of your truth inside of them. And a relationship built on compromise might survive, but a relationship built on truth is the only one that actually feels like connection. So to conclude today, I want to leave you with this question. Where in your relationships are you keeping the peace at the expense of yourself and your truth?